In the midst of a national and often fiery conversation about immigration, a new study says that foreign-born entrepreneurs are behind more than half of America's most valuable startups. Stuart Anderson, the study's author and the executive director of the nonpartisan National Foundation for American Policy, joins us via Skype to discuss the findings. Welcome to the show, Stuart.
Well, thanks for having me.
So you took a closer look at America's 87 unicorns. These are private startups worth more than $1 billion. Tell us a little bit about what you found.
Well, what I found was that more than half of these companies had at least one immigrant founder. And more than 70% of them, even if they didn't have an immigrant founder, had an immigrant in a key position. And what I also found is there's amazing stories behind these companies. For example, Nubar Afeyan, who went to MIT, got a PhD after coming here as an international student. He eventually started a company called Flagship Ventures, which actually creates more companies by doing in-house scientific research. And he's created 38 companies overall, including one of the companies on the list, Moderna Therapeutics, which is doing interesting messenger RNA trying to combat diseases. Michelle Zatlyn came to Harvard and eventually went to out west with some of her colleagues, and they ended up creating a company called Cloudflare, which essentially does internet security and other things for companies almost in a crowdsourcing way, and has like 4 million different websites within their network, and they're growing fast. So there's many companies like that. Even the founder, one of the co-founders of Uber, is actually a Canadian immigrant, which I'm sure many people didn't realize.
Right. We also have Instacart, SpaceX, WeWork, ZocDoc. These are companies we use every single day. They're very mainstream. I want to get to some numbers, too. Your study says that these startups create more than 700 jobs on average. And like you said, there are immigrants behind them, leading them and helping develop some of these huge unicorn companies. They also rely on visas to obtain employees and funding. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the visa element plays into the startup culture?
Well, it's a great point about the visas, because just because you start a company doesn't mean you can stay here. In fact, we estimated that a startup visa would actually create somewhere between 1 million to 3 million additional jobs over a decade if it was implemented. And that's because right now what ends up happening is it's very difficult to necessarily stay in the country. Michelle Zatlyn, who I just mentioned before, she wasn't necessarily able to stay. She had to get what's called an H-1B visa. Those often can be hard to get for someone starting a company, and also the visas run out. So she was actually denied at first. She was able to stay, and in their startup stages, it would have been very difficult for them to go on without her. Another company called App Dynamics, the gentleman who started that, Bhante Bansal, ended up having a situation where he had to wait 7 years. Yoti had to wait 7 years to get his green card before he could start the company, because while on the visa, he thought he would have to end up leaving the country if he wasn't able to get the company going and get approval from the Immigration Service.
Right, and that also impacts fundraising, because some of these VCs don't want to give you money if they don't know you can even stay here. There's been a lot of debate about visa programs on the campaign trail. Some candidates, like Donald Trump, are vowing to cut certain visa programs like H-1B altogether. And they say that companies are just looking to hire cheap labor, and it ultimately hurts American jobs. Based on your research, what impact would a cut like that have on startup companies?
Well, I would find that very few of these companies actually would have been formed in the United States if there wasn't a legal visa such as H-1B visa for them to be able to use. Because what ends up happening is that if you're not able to get a visa, essentially you can't stay in the United States. So I think Ted Cruz, unfortunately, used to be supportive of H-1B visas, and then he's sponsored a bill in which you pretty much have to leave the country for 10 years, which would almost end all of these different founders' careers in the United States if that had been put into place. Bernie Sanders isn't very good on this either. So you're right that there's several candidates who are really proposing things that wouldn't be helpful at all if you want to create more companies and allow the companies to grow, because they need personnel. And really, in many cases, 70 70% or more of the graduate students in electrical engineering and computer science are actually international students. So it seems that it doesn't make any sense to say that you wouldn't be able to hire such a large pool of people.
Yeah, it's a fascinating debate. Well, Stuart, thank you so much for joining us.